I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Whitmore standing at the edge of my driveway with a tape measure in one hand and her phone in the other, taking pictures of my fence like she was documenting a crime scene. It was a Tuesday morning in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, and I had just pulled into my driveway after dropping my kids off at school. The fence had been up for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of peace. 3 weeks of finally having some privacy in my backyard. 3 weeks of not having to wave awkwardly at my neighbors every time I wanted to sit outside with a beer. But apparently, those 3 weeks were about to end. "Can I help you with something, Patricia?" I called out as I stepped out of my truck. She looked up from her phone, and I could see that familiar expression on her face. The one that every homeowner in Saguaro Hills knew too well. Patricia Whitmore was the HOA president, had been for the past 6 years, and she wore that title like a badge of honor. Mid-40s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, even at 8 in the morning. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, and she had that pursed-lip look that said she was already rehearsing her complaint in her head. "Todd Yates," she said, not answering my question. "We need to talk about this fence." I felt my jaw tighten. "What about it?" "It's too tall." She said it with such certainty, such conviction, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. Almost. "No, it's not," I replied, walking toward her. "It's exactly 6 feet tall. I checked the local codes myself before I had it installed." Phoenix Municipal Code allows for 6-foot privacy fences in residential areas. Patricia shook her head, her lips pressing together even tighter. "The HOA covenant states that all fences must be no taller than 5 feet. You're in violation." I had been expecting this. Not hoping for it, not wanting it, but expecting it nonetheless. Patricia had a reputation for finding violations where none existed, for interpreting the HOA rules in whatever way suited her agenda. I had heard the stories from other neighbors. The Johnsons had been fined for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. The Ramirez family had gotten cited for parking their work van in their own driveway, and now it was my turn. "I reviewed the covenant before I built the fence," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Article 7, Section 3, subsection B. It says fences in rear yards may be up to 6 feet tall as long as they comply with local building codes. I'm in full compliance." Patricia's nostrils flared slightly. She did not like being contradicted, especially not with actual facts. "That section was amended 2 years ago at the annual meeting. The maximum height is now 5 feet for all fences, front and rear yards." "Really?" I pulled out my phone. "Because I downloaded the covenant from the HOA website last month when I was planning this project, and it doesn't say anything about an amendment. The website hasn't been updated yet." "That sounds like an HOA problem, not a me problem." Her face flushed red. "Mr. Yates, I'm trying to be reasonable here. You have 30 days to bring your fence into compliance, or you'll face daily fines of $50. I'm not taking down my fence, Patricia. It's legal, it's permitted, and it meets every requirement." She held up her phone, showing me the photos she had taken. "We'll see what the HOA board has to say about that. You'll be receiving a formal violation notice in the mail." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back toward her house 3 doors down. I stood there in my driveway, watching her go, feeling that familiar mix of frustration and disbelief that seemed to define life in an HOA community. I had moved to Saguaro Hills 5 years ago with my wife Claire and our 2 kids. It was a nice neighborhood, clean streets, good schools, the kind of place you think would be perfect for raising a family. And for the most part it was. The problems only started when Patricia Whitmore became HOA president. Before that, the association had been relatively hands-off. Sure, they enforced the basic rules about keeping your lawn maintained and not painting your house purple, but they were reasonable about it. Patricia, however, seemed to view her role as HOA president as a calling, a mission to ensure that every single rule was followed to the letter, and if the letter didn't exist, she would create it. I went inside and found Claire in the kitchen, working on her laptop. She was a freelance graphic designer and worked from home most days. She looked up when I walked in, and immediately her expression changed. "What happened?" "Patricia happened," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "She was measuring our fence when I got home. Says it's too tall and we're in violation of the HOA covenant." Claire closed her laptop. "But you checked all the codes before we built it." "I know, and it's completely legal." She's claiming there was an amendment that changed the height restriction from 6 feet to 5 feet, but it's not in the covenant documents on their website. Can she do that? Just make up amendments, she can try. I sat down at the kitchen table. She said we'll get a formal violation notice in the mail, and that we have 30 days to fix it or face daily fines. Claire's face hardened. My wife was normally the more diplomatic one in our relationship, the one who smoothed things over and found compromises. But even she had her limits, and Patricia Whitmore had been pushing those limits for years. "This is about the pool," Claire said. She was probably right. 3 months ago, the HOA board had proposed a special assessment of $5,000 per household to renovate the community pool and clubhouse. It was a ridiculous amount for renovations that nobody really wanted or needed. The pool was fine. The clubhouse was fine. But Patricia had gotten it in her head that Sagaro Hills needed to compete with the newer developments in the area, and she was determined to make it happen. I had been one of the most vocal opponents at the meeting where they proposed the assessment. I had pointed out that many families in the neighborhood were already struggling with the rising costs of living in Phoenix, and that adding another $5,000 of debt was irresponsible. I had gathered signatures from other homeowners who felt the same way. In the end, we had managed to block the assessment, at least temporarily. Patricia had been furious. "Maybe," I said, "but it doesn't matter what it's about. The fence is legal and I'm not taking it down." The formal violation notice arrived 4 days later, just as Patricia had promised. It was a professionally printed document on HOA letterhead, complete with photos of my fence and highlighted sections of text. According to the notice, I was in violation of Article 7, Section 3, Subsection B of the Sagaro Hills Homeowners Association Covenant, which allegedly stated that all fences must not exceed 5 feet in height. I was ordered to remove or modify the fence within 30 days or face fines of $50 per day, with the possibility of a lien being placed on my property if the fines went unpaid. I read through the notice 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each reading. Then I went to my home office and pulled up the covenant documents I had downloaded before building the fence. I read through Article 7, Section 3, Subsection B again. It clearly stated that rear yard privacy fences could be up to 6 feet tall as long as they met local building codes. There was no mention of any 5-foot restriction. I called the number listed on the violation notice. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Sagaro Hills HOA, this is Deborah speaking." Deborah was the HOA's administrative assistant, a part-time position that mostly involved answering phones and filing paperwork. She was nice enough, in her 60s, and had always seemed vaguely embarrassed by Patricia's more aggressive enforcement actions. "Hi, Deborah. This is Todd Yates. I just received a violation notice about my fence, and I need to dispute it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh yes, Mr. Yates, let me pull up your file," I heard typing in the background. "Okay, I have it here. The violation is for an oversized fence." "Is that what you're calling about?" "Yes. The notice claims my fence violates the covenant, but I have a copy of the covenant that says otherwise. It clearly allows for 6-foot fences in rear yards." More typing. "According to our records, there was an amendment passed at the 2023 annual meeting that changed the maximum fence height to 5 feet. Can you send me a copy of that amendment?" Let me check." More typing, a longer pause. "I'm not seeing a formal document here, but Mrs. Whitmore noted in the file that it was approved at the meeting." "Deborah, with all due respect, I need to see documentation. I can't just take Patricia's word for it. If there was an amendment, there should be meeting minutes, a vote record, something official." "I understand, Mr. Yates. Let me talk to Mrs. Whitmore and see what I can find. Can I call you back?" "Sure. But I need this resolved before the 30-day deadline in the notice." "I'll do my best." She hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone. Something about this whole situation felt off. HOA amendments required a vote of the membership, and I had attended the 2023 annual meeting. I did not remember any discussion about changing fence height restrictions. In fact, I remembered the meeting being remarkably boring, with most of the time spent discussing landscaping contracts and trash collection schedules. I decided to do some investigating of my own. My neighbor to the left was a guy named Marcus Chen, a software engineer who worked from home. We were friendly, had barbecued together a few times, and I knew he paid attention to HOA stuff. I walked over to his house and rang the doorbell. Marcus answered, looking surprised to see me in the middle of a workday. "Hey Todd, what's up?" Quick question. "Do you remember anything about a fence height amendment being passed at the HOA meeting in 2023? His brow furrowed. "Fence height? No, I don't think so." "Why?" I explained the situation with Patricia and the violation notice. Marcus listened, his expression growing increasingly annoyed. "That's complete nonsense," he said when I finished. "I was at that meeting. We talked about the landscaping budget and some drainage issues near the park. There was nothing about fences." "That's what I thought, but Patricia is claiming it was approved." Marcus shook his head. "This is typical Patricia. She pulls this stuff all the time. You know the Hendersons across the street?" "Yeah. Last year she tried to fine them for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, said it violated the covenant's restrictions on recreational equipment. But there's nothing in the covenant about basketball hoops. She eventually backed down when they threatened to lawyer up, but only after months of harassment. This was not making me feel any better about my situation. So what did they do? Just threaten legal action, pretty much. I think they sent her a letter from a real estate attorney pointing out that her claims were baseless. After that, she dropped it. Maybe I need to do the same thing. Probably. Patricia is a bully, but she usually backs down when someone stands up to her. The problem is most people just pay the fine or comply because it's easier than fighting." I thanked Marcus for the information and headed back home. Claire was in the living room, playing with our youngest daughter Emma, who was 3. Our son Jake was 7 and still at school. "Any luck?" Claire asked. "Not really. I talked to the HOA office and to Marcus. Nobody remembers any amendment about fence heights. I think Patricia is just making it up." Claire's jaw dropped. "She can't just make things up." "Apparently she can, or at least she thinks she can." "So what are we going to do?" I sat down on the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. "I think I need to talk to a lawyer." The next morning, I called a real estate attorney that a friend had recommended. Her name was Sarah Rodriguez, and she had experience dealing with HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Phoenix, and she agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Sarah's office was in a modern building with glass walls and minimalist furniture. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, occasionally taking notes on her laptop. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and nodded. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. First question, do you have a copy of your building permit? Yes, I got it from the city before construction started. Good. And you have the covenant documents that show the 6-foot height allowance? Yes, downloaded directly from the HOA website. Even better. And you're saying there's no record of this supposed amendment? The HOA assistant couldn't find any documentation, and several neighbors who attended the meeting where it supposedly happened don't remember it being discussed. Sarah nodded, typing something on her laptop. Here's what's likely happening. Your HOA president is either confused about what's in the covenant, or she's deliberately misrepresenting the rules to force you into compliance with what she thinks the rules should be. Either way, she doesn't have the authority to enforce a rule that doesn't exist. So what do? We send a letter. Formal, legal, citing the actual covenant language and the city permit. We point out that no valid amendment has been provided, and we demand that the violation notice be rescinded. We also put her on notice that if she continues to harass you or attempts to fine you, we'll pursue legal action for declaratory relief and possibly damages. Will that work? Usually, yes. Most HOA board members are volunteers who don't want to end up in court. Once they realize you have legal representation and a solid case, they typically back down. If they don't, we can file a lawsuit seeking a declaration that your fence is in compliance and asking for attorney's fees. How much would that cost? The letter is $500. If we have to file a lawsuit, we're looking at anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees, but we'd be asking the court to make the HOA pay our fees if we win. And based on what you've told me, we would win. I thought about it for a moment. $500 was a lot of money, but it was better than paying $50 a day in fines or tearing down a fence that had cost me $3,000 to build. Let's do it, I said. Send the letter. Sarah smiled. Good, I'll have it drafted and sent by tomorrow. Make sure you don't pay any fines or sign anything acknowledging the violation in the meantime. I left her office feeling better than I had in days. Maybe this would all be resolved quickly, and I could get back to enjoying my fence in peace. The letter went out the next day via certified mail. Sarah sent me a copy, and I had to admit, it was impressive. 4 pages of legal language, citations to Arizona HOA law, references to the covenant documents, and a clear demand that the violation notice be rescinded within 10 business days. It concluded with a thinly veiled threat of legal action if the HOA continued its course. I waited. The 10 business days came and went with no response from Patricia or the HOA board. Then, on day 11, I got a call from Deborah at the HOA office. Mr. Yates, I wanted to let you know that the board held an emergency meeting last night to discuss your situation. And Mrs. Whitmore is insisting that the amendment is valid and that the violation notice stands. She said that just because you hired a lawyer doesn't mean you can ignore the rules. I felt my stomach drop. So they're not rescinding the notice? No. In fact, Mrs. Whitmore instructed me to inform you that your 30-day compliance period ends in 1 week, and if the fence is not modified by then, daily fines will begin accruing. This is insane. I'm sorry, Mr. Yates. I'm just relaying the message. I hung up and immediately called Sarah Rodriguez. She answered on the second ring. They're not backing down, I told her. Patricia is doubling down on the violation. There was a pause. Okay, that's unusual, but it happens sometimes. People get stubborn, especially when they are in a position of power. We'll need to file the lawsuit. How long will that take? I can have the complaint drafted and filed by the end of the week. We'll ask for an expedited hearing given the time-sensitive nature of the fines. With any luck, we can get in front of a judge within a month or two. A month or two. That's thousands of dollars in fines. Don't pay the fines. They can't collect until they get a judgment, and they won't get a judgment because they're going to lose. Trust me, Todd. This is going to work out. I wanted to believe her, but as I hung up the phone, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had never been involved in a lawsuit before. The whole thing felt overwhelming and surreal, all because of a stupid fence. Claire was more optimistic. If Sarah says we're going to win, then we're going to win. Patricia is just trying to intimidate you into backing down. Don't let her. But Patricia was not done trying to intimidate me. 2 days later, I was out front watering my lawn when she pulled up in her silver Lexus SUV. She got out and walked straight toward me, her face set in that familiar expression of righteous indignation. Todd, we need to talk. I don't think we have anything to talk about, Patricia. My lawyer sent you a letter. If you want to communicate, do it through her. She ignored that. You're making this much harder than it needs to be. Just take down the fence and build a new one at the correct height. The HOA will even waive the fines if you do it voluntarily. The fence is at the correct height, 6 feet, as allowed by the covenant. The covenant was amended. Show me the amendment. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse and handed it to me. I unfolded it and started reading. It was a printout of what looked like meeting minutes from the 2023 annual meeting. About halfway down the page, there was a bullet point that read, Motion to amend Article 7, Section 3 to restrict all fences to a maximum height of 5 feet. Motion passed unanimously. I looked up at her. Where did this come from? The meeting minutes. I told you it was approved. Can I keep this? She hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but it doesn't change anything. The amendment is valid and you're in violation. She walked back to her SUV and drove off. I stood there holding the paper, reading it over and over again. Something about it felt wrong, but I could not put my finger on what. I took a photo of it with my phone and sent it to Sarah Rodriguez with a message explaining where it came from. She called me 20 minutes later. This is fake. What? The meeting minutes. They're fake. Or at least they've been altered. Look at the language. Motion passed unanimously. HOA motions don't pass unanimously. There's always someone who votes no or abstains. And look at the formatting. The font changes halfway down the page. Someone added that bullet point after the fact. So Patricia is literally forging documents. It looks that way. Do you know anyone else who was at that meeting who might have a copy of the original minutes? Maybe. Let me ask around. I started calling neighbors. Marcus Chen did not have a copy. Neither did the Johnsons or the Ramirez family. But then, I remembered that there was a guy at the end of the street, George Patterson, who was obsessive about keeping records. He had once told me that he had every HOA document going back to when the neighborhood was built in 2005. I walked down to his house and knocked on the door. George answered, looking surprised. He was in his early 70s, retired from a career in accounting, and had the meticulous personality that came with the profession. Todd, what can I do for you? I explained the situation. George's eyes narrowed as I talked, and by the time I finished, he looked angry. Patricia is claiming there was an amendment. I was at that meeting. There was no such thing. Do you happen to have a copy of the minutes? Of course. Come on in. He led me to a spare bedroom that he had converted into an office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, each drawer labeled with years and categories. He pulled open one of the drawers and flipped through folders until he found what he was looking for. Here. 2023 Annual Meeting Minutes. He handed me a stapled packet of papers. I flipped through until I found the relevant section. The formatting was the same as the version Patricia had given me, but the bullet point about the fence amendment was not there. Instead, that line just read, "Motion to approve landscaping budget of $35,000. Motion passed with 2 abstentions. Can I take a photo of this? Take the whole thing? I've got digital copies." I thanked George and practically ran back to my house. I scanned the document and emailed it to Sarah immediately. She called back within the hour. "This is perfect. We've got her. She altered official HOA documents to support a fake violation. That's fraud, Todd. Not just civil fraud, but potentially criminal fraud. What do we do with it?" "We include it in the lawsuit. And honestly, you might want to consider filing a police report. What she did is illegal." The thought of filing a police report against my HOA president felt surreal, but Sarah was right. Patricia had crossed a line. She had not just been overzealous or mistaken. She had deliberately falsified documents to try to force me into compliance with a rule that did not exist. That evening, I sat down with Claire and showed her everything. The fake minutes, the real minutes, Sarah's assessment of the situation. Claire stared at the documents, her face pale. "She could go to jail for this," Claire said quietly. "Maybe. I don't know if the police will actually pursue it, but at the very least she should lose her position on the HOA board. What if she comes after us harder? What if this makes things worse?" It was a valid concern. Patricia had already shown that she was willing to bend the rules to get her way. What would she do if she felt cornered? "I don't think we have a choice," I said. "If we back down now, she wins. And what's to stop her from doing this to someone else? We have to stand up to her." Claire nodded slowly. "Okay, do what you need to do." The next morning, I went to the Phoenix Police Department substation nearest to our neighborhood. I brought all the documents, the fake minutes, the real minutes, the violation notice, everything. The officer at the front desk listened to my explanation and then directed me to the fraud division. Detective Mike Anderson was a big guy, probably in his late 40s, with a shaved head and a no-nonsense demeanor. He invited me into a small interview room and listened as I explained the situation. "So your HOA president gave you fake meeting minutes to justify a violation notice," he said when I finished. "That's right, and my attorney believes it's fraud." He picked up the documents and studied them for several minutes. "This is definitely suspicious. The problem is, HOA disputes are usually civil matters. We don't typically get involved unless there's clear criminal intent. She falsified official documents. Isn't that criminal?" "It could be. But I'd need to investigate to see if there's enough evidence for charges. Can you leave these documents with me? I'll make copies and look into it." "Sure. How long will that take? Couple of weeks, maybe. I'll be in touch." I left the police station feeling a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. Things were escalating beyond what I had ever imagined when I decided to build a fence. But I had come this far, and I was not about to back down now. Sarah filed the lawsuit 3 days later. The complaint was extensive, laying out the entire case, the covenant language, the city permit, the fake amendment, everything. We were asking the court for a declaratory judgment that the fence was in compliance, an injunction preventing the HOA from enforcing the violation notice, and attorney's fees. Sarah also filed a motion for a preliminary injunction to stop the fines from accruing while the case was pending. The hearing on the preliminary injunction was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I waited. The 30-day compliance deadline came and went. True to her word, Patricia sent another letter stating that I was now being fined $50 per day and that the fines would continue to accrue until the fence was brought into compliance. I did not pay. Sarah had instructed me not to, and I trusted her judgment. But it was nerve-wracking watching the fines add up on paper, knowing that Patricia was probably gleeful about it. The neighbors were starting to take notice, too. Word spread quickly in Saguaro Hills about the lawsuit. Some people approached me with support, sharing their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Others seemed nervous, worried that I was rocking the boat and that it would somehow affect them. Marcus Chen was firmly in my corner. "You're doing the right thing," he told me one evening when we were both taking out our trash. "Patricia has needed to be put in her place for years. Maybe this will finally do it." But not everyone agreed. A woman named Linda, who lived 2 streets over, stopped me at the grocery store and gave me an earful about how I was causing unnecessary drama and costing the HOA money in legal fees. "If you had just followed the rules, none of this would be happening," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "I am following the rules," I replied. "Patricia is the one who's not." She shook her head and walked away, muttering something about troublemakers. The day of the preliminary injunction hearing arrived. Sarah had advised me to dress professionally and to be prepared to testify if necessary. I wore a suit and tie and drove to the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. Claire came with me for moral support, and we met Sarah in the lobby outside the courtroom. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. "Nervous." "Don't be. We've got a strong case." "Just answer any questions honestly and directly if the judge asks you anything." We went into the courtroom and took our seats. A few minutes later, Patricia arrived with the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Blackwell who looked like he had just graduated law school. He was young, maybe late 20s, and seemed nervous as he set up his materials at the opposing counsel table. The judge was a woman named Deanne Foster, middle-aged with graying hair and a stern expression. She called the case and asked both sides to present their arguments. Sarah went first, laying out the facts clearly and methodically. She presented the covenant language, the city permit, the fake minutes, and the real minutes. She argued that the HOA had no legal basis for the violation notice, and that allowing the fines to accrue while the case was pending would cause me irreparable harm. Richard Blackwell's response was weak. He tried to argue that the HOA had a right to enforce its rules and that I should have come to the board before building the fence. He made no mention of the fake minutes or the lack of a valid amendment. Judge Foster interrupted him halfway through. "Counselor, I've reviewed the filings. Do you have any evidence of a valid amendment changing the fence height restriction?" Blackwell shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA president has represented that an amendment was passed at the 2023 annual meeting. Do you have documentation of that amendment?" "Meeting minutes, a vote record, anything? We have meeting minutes that reference the amendment." "I've seen those minutes, Counselor. I've also seen the version provided by the plaintiff that does not include that reference. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Blackwell looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I'm not aware of the discrepancy, Your Honor." Judge Foster frowned. "Let me be clear. Based on the evidence presented, it appears that Mr. Yates has complied with all applicable rules and regulations. The HOA has not provided any credible evidence of a valid amendment. Therefore, I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction. The HOA is enjoined from assessing any further fines related to this fence, and any fines already assessed are stayed pending resolution of this case. We'll set a trial date for the declaratory judgment action. Is 3 months sufficient for discovery?" Both attorneys agreed, and the judge set a trial date for early June. We walked out of the courtroom, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. "That went well," Sarah said with a satisfied smile. Judge Foster saw right through their nonsense. "What happens now?" "Now we go through discovery. We'll request all HOA documents related to the 2023 meeting, any communications between board members about your fence, everything. And then we go to trial and get a final judgment that your fence is legal. And the fake minutes," the judge noticed. "Trust me, that's going to come back to haunt Patricia." She was right. 2 weeks after the hearing, Detective Anderson called me. "Mr. Yates, I wanted to update you on the investigation. I've interviewed several people who attended the 2023 HOA meeting, and they all confirm that there was no discussion of a fence amendment. I've also had a forensic document examiner look at the 2 versions of the minutes. They confirmed that the version provided by Mrs. Whitmore was altered after the fact. So, what does that mean? It means I'm recommending that the county attorney file criminal charges for forgery and fraud. It'll be up to them whether to prosecute, but based on the evidence, I think they will." "Wow, okay. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, you might want to let your attorney know this could affect your civil case." I immediately called Sarah and relayed the information. She was thrilled. "This is huge, Todd. If Patricia is facing criminal charges, the HOA is going to want to settle this case fast. They'll want to distance themselves from her as much as possible." Sarah was right again. 3 days later, Richard Blackwell called her and asked about settlement. The HOA was willing to rescind the violation notice, waive all fines, and pay my attorney's fees if I agreed to drop the lawsuit. "What do you think?" I asked Sarah. "I think it's a good offer. You get everything you wanted and you don't have to go through a trial. The only downside is that you won't get a formal judgment declaring that your fence is legal, but honestly, with the violation notice rescinded, that's a moot point. What about Patricia? She'll face the criminal charges separately. That's not part of this settlement." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see this through to the end, to get a judgment that would vindicate me completely. But another part of me was tired. Tired of the stress, tired of the fighting, tired of dealing with all of this. And Claire was tired too. This had taken a toll on both of us. "Let's settle," I said. The settlement agreement was finalized a week later. The HOA officially rescinded the violation notice, acknowledged that my fence complied with all rules and regulations, and paid Sarah's legal fees, which had reached just over $7,000. In exchange, I agreed to dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning I could not refile it later. It felt anticlimactic in a way. After all the drama and stress, it ended with some signatures on paper and a check to my attorney. But it also felt like a victory. I had stood up to Patricia, and I had won. The criminal case took longer to resolve. The county attorney filed charges in late April, and Patricia was arrested on 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud. According to the local news article I found online, she was released on bail the same day. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. They also issued a statement apologizing to the community for the situation and promising to review all HOA procedures to ensure nothing like this happened again. Patricia's trial was scheduled for September, but she ended up taking a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud in exchange for the forgery charges being dropped. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution for the HOA's legal fees in defending against my lawsuit. I ran into Deborah from the HOA office at the grocery store a few weeks after the sentencing. She looked relieved. "I just want you to know I never agreed with what Patricia was doing," she said. but she was my boss and I didn't feel like I could say anything. I understand, it's not your fault. The new board president is much better. Kevin Thompson. He used to be the treasurer, very level-headed. That's good to hear. Life in Saguaro Hills slowly returned to normal. The new board president, Kevin, reached out to me personally to apologize for everything that had happened and to assure me that the board was committed to fair and reasonable enforcement of the rules. I appreciated the gesture. My fence remained standing at exactly 6 feet tall, providing privacy and peace in my backyard. Claire and I hosted a barbecue that summer, inviting Marcus and several other neighbors who had supported us through the ordeal. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. The kids played in the pool, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could relax in my own home without worrying about HOA violations or legal battles. Marcus raised his beer in a toast to Todd for having the guts to stand up to Patricia Whitmore and win. Everyone cheered and clinked their bottles together. I smiled, feeling grateful for the support of my neighbors and my wife. I couldn't have done it without all of you, I said, and especially without Claire. Claire squeezed my hand. We make a good team. The rest of the summer passed peacefully. Jake started 2nd grade in August, and Emma began preschool. Claire's design business was thriving, and I got a promotion at work. The neighborhood felt different somehow, lighter, as if Patricia's removal had lifted a weight that everyone had been carrying without fully realizing it. In October, I attended my first HOA meeting since the lawsuit. Kevin Thompson ran the meeting efficiently and professionally, covering the necessary business without drama or power trips. When it came time for community comments, I stood up. I just want to thank the new board for the way you've been handling things. It's refreshing to feel like the HOA is working for the homeowners instead of against them. Kevin nodded appreciatively. That's exactly what we're trying to do, Todd. We're here to maintain property values and ensure everyone can enjoy their homes, not to make people's lives difficult. Several other homeowners spoke up with similar sentiments. It was clear that Patricia's reign had affected more people than I had realized, and that her departure was welcomed by most of the community. As the meeting wrapped up, a woman I did not know approached me. She introduced herself as Jennifer Martinez, and she lived on the other side of the neighborhood. I wanted to thank you, she said. Patricia had been harassing us for 2 years about our front yard landscaping. She kept claiming we had too many rocks and not enough plants, even though we were following the drought-tolerant landscaping guidelines. After what happened with you, we finally had the courage to push back. The new board reviewed our landscaping and confirmed we were in compliance. We don't have to tear everything out and start over. I'm glad it worked out, I said. You set a precedent. You showed everyone that we don't have to just accept it when the HOA overreaches. That matters. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that night. I had not set out to be any kind of hero or champion for homeowners' rights. I had just wanted to build a fence and be left alone. But sometimes standing up for yourself ends up helping other people too. The holidays came and went. We hosted Thanksgiving at our house, with both sets of parents visiting from out of state. My dad, who had been skeptical about the whole fence situation from the beginning, admitted that I had done the right thing. I thought you were being stubborn, he said as we sat in the backyard after dinner. But you proved your point. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's easier to just give in. Winter in Phoenix was mild and beautiful. I spent weekends working in the yard, enjoying my legally compliant 6-foot fence and feeling grateful that the drama was behind me. Patricia had moved out of the neighborhood in December, selling her house and relocating somewhere in Scottsdale, according to neighborhood gossip. I felt no satisfaction in her departure, just relief that the conflict was over. In January, almost exactly a year after I had first built the fence, I received a letter from the HOA. For a moment, my stomach clenched, old anxieties resurfacing. But when I opened it, I found that it was just the annual meeting notice. Nothing threatening, nothing accusatory, just a simple notification that the meeting would be held in February and that the agenda would include electing board members for the coming year. Claire saw me reading it and came over. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, folding the letter and setting it aside. "Everything's fine." That evening, after the kids were in bed, Claire and I sat on our back patio. The fence stood solid and tall around us, blocking the view of the neighbors and giving us the privacy we had wanted from the beginning. The whole ordeal seemed almost surreal now, like a strange dream that had finally ended. "Do you ever regret building it?" Claire asked. "The fence, I mean, given everything that happened." I thought about it for a moment. "No, I don't regret it. We deserve to have privacy in our own backyard." And we were following all the rules. Patricia was the one who turned it into a nightmare, not me. But it was so stressful. The lawsuit, the police report, all of it. It was. But we got through it. And now we have a fence that nobody can complain about, at least not legally. Claire laughed. "True. And we learned that we're tougher than we thought. We did." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Dogs barking, the hum of air conditioners, the occasional car driving past. Normal suburban sounds, peaceful and familiar. The next day, I was working from home when I got an unexpected call from Sarah Rodriguez. "Todd, I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia Whitmore's probation officer contacted me." Apparently, Patricia violated her probation by failing to complete her community service hours. She's been ordered to appear before the judge next week. What happens if she violated probation? She could end up serving jail time. The original plea deal kept her out of jail, but if she's not following the terms of her probation, the judge can revoke it. Wow, I almost feel bad for her. Don't. She made her choices. She falsified documents, harassed you, and tried to extort money through fake fines. Now she's facing the consequences. Sarah was right, but I still felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but maybe acknowledgement of how far Patricia had fallen. She had gone from being HOA president, a position of respect and authority in the community, to a convicted criminal facing potential jail time. All because she could not let go of control. I followed the case through public records online. Patricia appeared before Judge Foster, the same judge who had granted my preliminary injunction. The judge was not pleased that Patricia had failed to complete her community service requirements. She revoked Patricia's probation and sentenced her to 90 days in county jail, followed by another year of supervised probation. The local news covered it briefly. A short article about an HOA president who had forged documents and was now serving jail time. I wondered if Patricia saw the article, if she understood how unnecessary all of this had been. If she had just left my fence alone, none of it would have happened. March arrived, bringing warmer weather and the beginning of spring. Jake's baseball season started, and our weekends were filled with games and practices. Emma was thriving in preschool, making friends and coming home each day with art projects and stories. Life felt normal again, the way it was supposed to feel. I saw Kevin Thompson, the new HOA president, at one of Jake's baseball games. His son was on the same team. We chatted in the bleachers while our kids played. "How's the HOA going?" I asked. "Good, quiet," which is exactly how it should be. "We've been focusing on the basics, maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events. No drama." "That's refreshing. Tell me about it. I've been on the board for 4 years, and the last year under Patricia's leadership was exhausting. She made everything into a battle. Now it's just a volunteer position that takes a few hours a month the way it's supposed to be. Well, I appreciate it. You're doing a good job, he smiled. Thanks, and thanks for holding the line with Patricia. I think everyone on the board knew she was out of control, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. You forced the issue, and honestly, it needed to happen. As summer approached, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. It had started with such a simple thing, wanting a fence for privacy. And it had spiraled into a legal battle, a criminal investigation, and months of stress and anxiety. But it had also taught me something important about standing up for yourself, about not letting people abuse power just because they hold a position of authority. The fence still stood at 6 feet tall, exactly as it should. Every time I looked at it, I felt a sense of pride. Not just because it was a nice fence, well built and functional, but because it represented something more. It represented the principle that rules matter, that people in power cannot just make things up as they go along, and that ordinary homeowners have rights that deserve to be protected. Claire and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary in June. We went out to dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown Phoenix, leaving the kids with Claire's parents for the evening. Over wine and good food, we talked about the past year and everything we had been through. I'm proud of you, Claire said. For not backing down. I know it was hard. I'm proud of us, I replied. We did it together. You think things would have been different if we had just taken the fence down, if we had just given Patricia what she wanted? I considered the question carefully. Maybe. We would have avoided the lawsuit and the stress. But we also would have lost $3,000 rebuilding a fence that didn't need to be rebuilt, and Patricia would have moved on to her next victim. At least this way we stopped her, Claire nodded, and saved other people from going through the same thing. Exactly. We clinked our wine glasses together, toasting to survival, to resilience, and to the simple pleasure of having a 6-foot fence in our backyard. The rest of the year passed without incident. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Kevin's leadership. Patricia completed her jail sentence and moved away from the Phoenix area entirely, according to Deborah. The neighborhood felt peaceful and stable, the way a suburban community should feel. In November, I was raking leaves in the front yard when a young couple pulled up in a car and got out. They introduced themselves as potential home buyers looking at houses in the neighborhood. We're considering making an offer on the house at the end of the street, the woman said. Can I ask you about the HOA? We've heard mixed things. I leaned on my rake and smiled. The HOA is good now. There was some drama last year with the previous president, but she's gone. The current board is reasonable and fair. They enforce the rules, but they're not looking to make your life difficult. That's good to hear. We've lived in HOA neighborhoods before, and it can really vary. It definitely can, but I think you'd be happy here. It's a good neighborhood, good people, good schools if you have kids. They thanked me and drove off. After they left, I finished raking the leaves and thought about how differently that conversation might have gone a year ago. If Patricia had still been in charge, I probably would have warned them away. But now, I could honestly recommend Saguaro Hills as a good place to live. December brought the holidays and another year's end. On New Year's Eve, Claire and I stood in our backyard as midnight approached, watching fireworks light up the Phoenix sky in the distance. Jake and Emma were inside watching a kids' movie, not quite old enough to stay up until midnight. What's your resolution for the new year? Claire asked. I don't know, maybe just to appreciate the peace and quiet, she laughed. That's a good one. No more legal battles. Definitely no more legal battles. As the clock struck midnight, we kissed and held each other close. The fence stood tall and solid around us, a symbol of everything we had fought for and won. And in that moment, standing in my backyard with my wife, I felt completely at peace. The fence had been worth it. Every moment of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, every anxious night wondering how it would all turn out. It had been worth it because we had stood up for what was right, and we had won. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had ever been bullied or harassed by an HOA gone rogue. As the new year began, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we could face them. We had proven that to ourselves. And I knew that every time I walked into my backyard and saw that 6-foot fence, I would remember that lesson. Sometimes the smallest battles are the most important ones. Sometimes standing up for your right to have a legally compliant fence is about more than just the fence. It's about dignity, about fairness, about the principle that power should be exercised responsibly, and that ordinary people have the right to live their lives without unreasonable interference. Patricia Whitmore had learned that lesson the hard way. And I had learned that I was stronger and more resilient than I had ever realized. We both came out of that year changed, though in very different ways. The fence still stands today, exactly 6 feet tall, meeting every single local code requirement. And every time I look at it, I smile, remembering the battle that was fought and won, and the peace that followed.